The rain had been falling since late afternoon, the kind that made the city feel quieter than usual, and Daniel Harper stood under a flickering streetlight outside a small independent bookstore, wondering why his heart was racing as if he were about to do something reckless, because until this moment his life had been built on careful choices, safe routines, and predictable days, and nothing about him suggested he would be standing in the rain waiting for someone who might not even come out. Yet there he was, hands in his coat pockets, shoes damp, mind full of thoughts he could no longer ignore, all because of Emily Carter, the woman who worked inside that bookstore, the woman who had slowly changed his days without ever trying to, the woman who had smiled at him a month ago while recommending a novel and somehow made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. Daniel had noticed her first because she laughed easily, not loudly, but with warmth, and because she listened when people spoke, really listened, as if every word mattered, and over the weeks their conversations had grown from simple greetings to longer talks about books, memories, and quiet dreams, yet Daniel had always kept a careful distance, telling himself that liking someone was harmless as long as he did nothing about it, but that excuse collapsed the moment Emily mentioned she was leaving, moving to Vancouver for a new job, a new life, spoken so casually that it shocked him, because to her it was just a step forward. But to him it felt like a door closing before he had even tried to open it. Tonight was supposed to be the night he walked away, accepted that some connections were temporary, but his feet refused to move, his chest felt tight, and every second outside that bookstore reminded him of how empty his apartment would feel without the small moments he shared with her, the quiet smiles, the short talks that somehow made his long days feel lighter, and as he stood there, rain soaking through his jacket, he argued with himself, listing all the reasons to leave. He didn't want to make things awkward, he didn't want to be rejected, he didn't want to look foolish, but another voice inside him spoke louder, telling him that regret would hurt more than rejection, that silence would follow him longer than embarrassment, and when the bookstore lights dimmed and chairs were stacked, he felt panic rise, thinking he had waited too long, that he had once again chosen safety over honesty. But then the door opened, warm light spilled onto the sidewalk, and Emily stepped out, surprised to see him standing there, her hair pulled back, her scarf loose around her neck, her eyes curious and kind, and in that instant Daniel knew that this moment mattered, that this was not just about a crush or a passing feeling, but about a choice that could change the way he lived his life, because when Emily said his name softly, as if it meant something, he felt years of quiet loneliness press against his chest. And instead of turning away like he always did, instead of hiding behind polite words, he felt himself step forward, heart pounding, realizing that whatever happened next, he was done watching life pass by, done pretending that wanting more was something to be ashamed of, and as rain continued to fall around them, the city moving on without noticing, Daniel stood there on the edge of a decision, unaware that this single moment, this single risk, would become the beginning of everything that followed. They walked together beneath a shared umbrella as the rain softened into a steady whisper, and the city lights reflected on the wet road like broken stars, while Daniel tried to calm the storm inside his chest, knowing that every step beside Emily mattered more than he wanted to admit, because this was no longer just a casual walk but a moment balanced between courage and fear. Emily spoke first, her voice light but thoughtful, mentioning small things about work and the bookstore as if giving him time to breathe, and Daniel answered, though his mind was focused on the truth pressing against his ribs, the words he had carried all evening and could no longer hold back, and when they reached the corner where they usually separated, the silence grew heavy, not awkward but meaningful, as if both sensed something important was about to be said. Daniel looked at her and saw the quiet kindness in her eyes, the same kindness that had drawn him in from the start, and without overthinking, without letting doubt take control, he spoke honestly, telling her that she mattered to him, that her presence had changed his days, that he did not expect anything but could not stay silent knowing she would soon leave, and once the words were out, he felt exposed but strangely free, like someone who had finally told the truth after years of holding it back. Emily listened carefully, not interrupting, her expression soft but serious, and when she spoke, her voice carried both warmth and restraint, admitting that she had felt something too, that she had noticed his quiet nature and the way he paid attention, but she also reminded him of her upcoming move, of the uncertainty waiting ahead, explaining that she had learned to be careful with her heart after past disappointments, and though her words were gentle, Daniel felt the weight of reality settle between them, the understanding that feelings alone did not erase distance or timing. Still, instead of pulling away, they stood closer, sharing the space between honesty and hesitation, and Daniel made it clear that he was not asking for promises or commitments, only truth, only the chance to acknowledge what was real before it slipped away, and Emily nodded, appreciating his sincerity, confessing that part of her wished he had spoken sooner, while another part was afraid of how deeply such moments could affect her, and the streetlight above them flickered as if marking the fragile nature of what they shared. After a long pause, Emily suggested they talk again soon, when emotions were calmer and the rain was not falling around them, inviting him to visit the bookstore the next day, and as she stepped back and walked away, Daniel watched her go with a mix of hope and uncertainty, knowing that nothing was decided yet, but also knowing that something had already changed inside him, because he had chosen honesty over silence, and even though questions remained unanswered, he felt lighter than he had in years, unaware that this simple exchange of truth and restraint was shaping a path neither of them could yet see, but one that would demand even more courage in the days ahead. The days that followed moved quickly, yet each one carried weight, as Daniel began visiting the bookstore more often, sometimes to talk, sometimes just to sit nearby and feel the comfort of Emily's presence, and their conversations grew deeper without either of them forcing it, flowing naturally from books into memories, hopes, and quiet fears they rarely shared with others, and Daniel found himself opening up about his careful life, how he had always chosen certainty over desire, while Emily spoke about her past, the times she had trusted easily and been hurt, the reason she now approached feelings with caution, and despite the warmth between them, there was an unspoken limit they both respected, a line drawn not by rules but by awareness of time, because every day brought Emily closer to leaving. The pace of life around them stayed busy, customers came and went, traffic filled the streets, yet in those moments together, the world felt smaller and more focused, as if it existed only to give them space to understand each other, and Daniel noticed how Emily's laughter faded when she talked about Vancouver, how her excitement was mixed with fear, and he realized she was not running towards something as much as she was stepping away from uncertainty, and this understanding made him more patient, more attentive, choosing not to rush her or himself, knowing that whatever this was needed care, not pressure. Evenings became their favorite time, walking by the river or sitting on benches where words felt easier to say, and Daniel learned that attraction was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was simply choosing to stay present, choosing to listen, choosing to show up again and again, and Emily responded to this consistency, her guarded nature softening as she saw that Daniel did not demand more than she could give, and yet, as the calendar pages turned, the truth remained unavoidable. And the closer her departure came, the heavier the air between them felt, filled with things unsaid and decisions postponed. On her final week, the tension became clear, their smiles slower, their pauses longer, and Daniel felt a growing urgency inside him, not panic, but clarity, realizing that doing nothing was also a choice, and one he could no longer accept, because he had already changed by allowing himself to care, and losing Emily without trying would feel like betraying that change. The night before her last day at the bookstore, they stood outside after closing, the lights dim behind them, and Emily admitted she was scared of how much this connection meant in such a short time, scared that distance would turn something gentle into something painful, and Daniel answered honestly, telling her that fear was no longer enough to stop him, that even if the future was unclear, he believed some chances were worth taking simply because they mattered, and though Emily did not give him an answer then, the way she looked at him, thoughtful and emotional, told him his words had reached her. The next morning arrived too soon, and Daniel helped her pack books and small boxes into her car, the ordinary task made heavy by the meaning attached to it, and when everything was loaded and there was nothing left to delay the moment, they stood facing each other, unsure how to say goodbye without turning it into an ending, and Emily finally spoke, saying she did not want to pretend this was nothing, that whatever happened next, she wanted to remember this connection as something real and honest, and Daniel agreed, telling her that he did not expect certainty, only the chance to keep this part of their lives open, and as she hugged him, holding on longer than necessary, both felt the quiet understanding that distance would test what they had begun, but silence would destroy it, and as Emily drove away, Daniel stood watching until her car disappeared, feeling both loss and resolve, knowing that part 3 of his story was not about separation, but about the moment he decided he would not let fear choose his future for him. Months passed, and life moved in ways Daniel had never allowed before. As calls turned into long conversations, messages became daily habits, and distance slowly lost its power over what had started between him and Emily, because instead of fading, their connection grew clearer, stronger, built on honesty rather than fantasy. And when Daniel finally stood in Vancouver for the first time, the city felt unfamiliar yet full of promise, not because of the streets or buildings, but because Emily was there, waiting with the same warm smile that had once greeted him in a small bookstore. And in that moment he understood that the risk he took that rainy night had already reshaped his life. Daniel began visiting more often, each trip teaching him something new about compromise, patience, and effort, and instead of fearing change, he started welcoming it, realizing that growth required movement. And after many long talks about work, future plans, and personal fears, he made the decision that once would have terrified him, choosing to transfer his job and build a life that allowed space for love as well as stability. And when he told Emily, she did not rush to celebrate, but listened carefully, knowing the weight of such a choice. And when she finally embraced him, there was gratitude rather than surprise, because she knew he was not doing this for her alone, but for the version of himself he had discovered. Living in the same city brought new challenges, small disagreements, busy days, and moments of doubt, yet it also brought shared routines, morning walks, quiet dinners, and the comfort of knowing they were choosing each other every day. And Daniel learned that love was not about dramatic gestures, but about consistency and respect, while Emily learned that trust could grow without urgency or pressure. And as seasons changed, Daniel often thought back to the man he had been, standing in the rain, afraid of speaking his truth, and he barely recognized him now, because the life he lived had expanded beyond safety into meaning. One evening, as they stood by the water watching the sky change color, Emily asked him if he ever regretted taking that first step, and Daniel answered without hesitation, saying that even if the outcome had been uncertain, choosing honesty had given him a life he could be proud of, a life shaped by courage instead of fear. And as they walked home together, the city lights reflecting around them, Daniel realized that the greatest change was not the move, the relationship, or the new city, but the way he now faced the world, open and willing, knowing that one risk had not only changed his life, but had finally taught him how to live it fully.